At 105 years old, Robert Anderson has spent the last decade in silence, refusing to speak since the night a house fire claimed his daughter Emily, granddaughter, and great-grandchildren. Each morning, he sits in Boston Common, feeding pigeons and holding a worn photograph, his only connection to the family he lost. But on a cold autumn morning, a young girl's voice breaks through his solitude. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like to share my sandwich?" Looking up, he sees a 12-year-old girl with kind eyes, wearing a name tag from a school field trip that reads, Emily. What happens next will shake Robert's world as he discovers a connection between this child and his lost family that defies explanation, leading to a revelation that will prove love transcends even the deepest tragedy. Like and subscribe to follow this heart-wrenching story about how fate can heal the deepest wounds in the most unexpected ways. The morning routine hadn't changed in 10 years. Robert would wake at dawn, put on his carefully pressed suit, and walk slowly to the same bench in Boston Common. His cane tapped a quiet rhythm on the sidewalk, marking time like a metronome of memories. In his pocket, the photograph was folded and worn at the edges from daily handling. He'd taken it the morning of the fire, Emily laughing in the kitchen with her daughter Sarah and the twins, making Sunday pancakes. 12 hours later, they were gone. The investigators said it was an electrical fault, a simple wire, frayed and forgotten behind a wall. Robert had been at the grocery store when it happened, buying ice cream for dessert. He still woke up some nights smelling smoke, hearing sirens, seeing the flames that took everything he loved. "Would you like to share my sandwich, sir?" The voice startled him. Robert hadn't heard anyone approach. His hearing wasn't what it used to be. Looking up, he saw a young girl, maybe 12, holding out half of a peanut butter sandwich. "My mom always packs too much," she said with a gentle smile that made his heart ache. Her school name tag fluttered in the breeze. Emily Thompson, 7th grade field trip. Robert's hands trembled as he read the name. Emily. His Emily had made peanut butter sandwiches every day for Sarah to take to school. "I'm supposed to be with my class at the Science Museum," Emily continued, sitting beside him without waiting for an invitation. "But I saw you sitting here alone. Nobody should eat lunch alone." She reminded him so much of his Emily, not just the name, but something in her eyes, in the way she tilted her head when she smiled. His Emily had been just like this at 12, full of kindness for every stray cat and lonely person she encountered. "You don't talk much, do you?" Emily asked, not unkindly. "That's okay. My grandpa didn't talk much either before he passed away. Mum says some people carry so much love in their hearts that words just get in the way." Robert found himself reaching for the photograph in his pocket. He hadn't shown it to anyone in years, hadn't wanted to share his grief. But something about this girl. "Is that your family?" Emily asked, looking at the image. Then she gasped, her sandwich forgotten. "But that looks just like..." She reached into her backpack with shaking hands and pulled out her own photograph. It showed her mother at 12 years old, standing in front of a house that had burned down long ago. "This was my mum's childhood home," Emily said quietly. "Before the fire. She was at a sleepover that night. Her whole family. Robert's world tilted on its axis. Sarah, his granddaughter, had indeed been at a sleepover the night of the fire, but they'd told him she'd come home early, that she'd been inside when... "What's your mother's name?" he asked, his voice rusty from years of silence. "Sarah," Emily replied. "Sarah Thompson. She was adopted after the fire. She never knew if any of her family survived." Robert's cane clattered to the ground. Sarah was alive. His granddaughter was alive. And sitting next to him was his great-granddaughter, named for the daughter he'd lost, carrying the same gentle soul. "I'm your great-grandfather," he whispered, tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. "Sarah is my granddaughter." Emily stared at him for a long moment, then threw her arms around his thin shoulders. "I knew it," she said through her own tears. "Mum always said she felt like someone was watching over us. She comes to the common sometimes just to sit and try to remember." Robert held his great-granddaughter, feeling a decade of silence and grief beginning to crack. Where is she now?" "At work," Emily said. "She's a nurse at Massachusetts General. That's why we moved back to Boston last month. She got a job there." Robert's hands trembled as he took out his phone, a device he'd barely used in years. Could you help me call her?" Emily's teacher was frantically searching the Science Museum for her missing student when she received the call. A nurse at Massachusetts General was crying too hard to speak clearly, saying something about her daughter and a grandfather and Boston Common. Meanwhile, Robert and Emily sat on their bench, waiting. The remaining half of the peanut butter sandwich lay forgotten between them, as Emily showed him pictures on her phone. Sarah's graduation from nursing school, their small apartment, the cat they'd rescued last month. "Mom never gave up hope," Emily said softly. "She has a box of newspaper clippings about the fire. She reads them sometimes late at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She's been searching for any family that might have survived." Robert's heart ached, thinking of Sarah, his precious granddaughter, carrying that burden alone all these years. "They told me everyone died," he said, his voice still rough from disuse. I should have looked harder, should have asked more questions." "You couldn't have known," Emily assured him, holding his trembling hand. "Mum says sometimes life breaks our hearts so badly that we can't think straight anymore." They heard running footsteps approaching. Robert looked up to see a woman in nursing scrubs sprinting across the common, her hospital ID badge flying behind her. Sarah. His Sarah, all grown up, but with the same eyes he remembered, the same determined chin. She stopped a few feet away, staring at Robert as tears streamed down her face. "Grandpa," she whispered, "is it really you?" Robert tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Sarah closed the distance between them, falling to her knees in front of his bench. Her hands reached out tentatively, touching his face as if she couldn't believe he was real. They told me everyone." She couldn't finish through her sobs. "They told me the same thing," Robert said, pulling her close. "My precious girl, all these years." Emily watched her mother and great-grandfather holding each other, both crying too hard to speak. Other people in the park had stopped to watch the scene unfold, many wiping away their own tears. "I looked for you," Sarah managed between sobs. "Every year on the anniversary, I would come to the common. Sometimes I'd sit here for hours, hoping, praying." "I was here," Robert said, "every day, on this same bench. If I'd only known." Sarah pulled back slightly, studying his face. "You haven't changed. Older, yes, but your eyes. I remember those eyes. You used to read me stories, do all the different voices for each character." Robert laughed through his tears. "The Three Little Pigs was your favorite. You always made me do the wolf's voice extra scary." Emily's teacher had arrived now, along with a small crowd of students and park visitors who had gathered to witness the reunion. But Robert, Sarah, and Emily existed in their own bubble of rediscovered love. "What happened that night?" Sarah asked quietly. "Why did they tell us different stories?" Robert shook his head. "I don't know, sweetheart. I was at the store by the time I got back." His voice broke. "They said you'd come home early from your sleepover, that you were inside when—" "But I wasn't," Sarah said. "I stayed at Jenny's house all night. When we heard about the fire the next morning, they told me everyone was gone. The social workers said there was no family left to take me." Emily spoke up, her voice small but clear. Maybe somebody made a mistake." Or maybe they thought they were protecting you both somehow. Robert looked at his great-granddaughter, seeing Emily's, his daughter's, wisdom in her young face. Maybe, sweet girl, but right now, all that matters is that we found each other again. Over the next few days, pieces of the puzzle began coming together. Sarah took emergency leave from the hospital, spending every moment with her grandfather. They pored over old documents, made calls, and slowly uncovered the truth about that terrible night. A young social worker, overwhelmed by the tragedy, had made a crucial mistake in the chaos. She'd seen Robert's name on the list of fire victims. He'd been presumed dead when they couldn't find him immediately after the fire. By the time the error was discovered, Sarah had already been placed in the foster system, and someone had decided it would be less traumatic to let both grandfather and granddaughter believe they'd lost everyone. 10 years, Sarah said quietly, sitting in Robert's small apartment. 10 years of unnecessary grief, all because someone thought they knew what was best for us. Robert watched Emily sleeping on his old couch, peaceful in the afternoon light. I look at her, and I see so much of your grandmother, your mother. It's like all the love we lost found its way back to us through her. Sarah smiled through tears. That's why I named her Emily. I couldn't remember much after the fire, the trauma, the doctors said, but I remembered the name Emily, remembered it meant love and safety and home. I wanted my daughter to have that. Robert showed Sarah his daily journal, a decade of entries, each one addressed to the family he thought he'd lost. I wrote to you every day, he said. Even though I thought you were gone, I needed to tell you about my days, my thoughts, my love. Sarah read the entries with trembling hands. Dear Sarah, today I saw a girl in the park who laughed just like you. I hope wherever you are, you're still laughing. My precious granddaughter, the nurses say I should stop visiting your grave, that it's not healthy. But how can I stop visiting when it's the only way I can still talk to you? Sarah, my heart, I'm getting old. Each day I hope it's the day I'll see you and everyone again. But today, a little girl shared her sandwich with me, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like maybe there's still some love left in the world. Emily stirred on the couch, opening her eyes. Mom? Are you crying? Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. Happy tears, baby. Come here, Grandpa Robert was just showing me his journals. He wrote to us every day. Emily joined them at the table, her young face serious. Can we write in it together now? Make new memories to go with the old ones. Robert handed her his pen. What should we write? Emily thought for a moment, then began writing in her careful schoolgirl hand. Dear family, today we're not writing about loss anymore. Today we're writing about finding each other, about love that was never really lost, just waiting to be rediscovered. Today we're writing about new beginnings. Sarah and Robert watched her write, both marveling at how this child seemed to carry the wisdom of all their lost loved ones in her heart. As weeks passed, Robert's small apartment came alive with something it hadn't known in a decade, the sound of family. Sarah and Emily moved in temporarily while they looked for a bigger place nearby. The quiet rooms that had held only grief now echoed with laughter, conversation, and the gentle chaos of shared lives. Every morning, Emily would help Robert with his exercises, movements prescribed by doctors but ignored for years until his great-granddaughter made them into a game. Come on, great-grandpa, she'd encourage. Let's be pandas doing Tai Chi. Sarah watched them together, seeing how her daughter had somehow inherited not just her great-aunt's name, but her ability to heal wounded hearts. Emily had her grandmother's laugh, her mother's gentle way with people, and something uniquely her own, a wisdom far beyond her 12 years. One evening, as they sorted through old photographs, Emily found something that made her gasp. It was a picture of her great-aunt Emily at 12, standing in front of a piano. "Mom, look!" she exclaimed. "She's wearing the same locket I have." Sarah looked confused. "What locket, honey?" Emily pulled out a silver heart-shaped locket from under her shirt. "This one. I found it in that antique shop last month, remember? The one near the Common." Robert's hands trembled as he reached for the necklace. This was your great-aunt's. Her mother, my wife, gave it to her on her 12th birthday. She was wearing it the night of—" His voice broke. "But how—" Sarah started. Emily's eyes were wide. "The shop owner said someone had just brought it in that morning. He said it felt special, like it was waiting for the right person." Robert carefully opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph he knew would be there. His wife Helen holding baby Emily. On the other side was an inscription, "To our Emily, may you always carry our love with you." "The firefighters never found it in the ruins," Robert whispered. "We thought it was lost forever, like everything else." Sarah was crying softly. "All these years I had this feeling, like someone was guiding us back here, back to Boston, back to the Common, back to you." Emily touched the locket gently. Maybe they were. Great-aunt Emily, Grandma Helen, everyone we lost. Maybe they've been watching over us, helping us find our way back together. Robert looked at his great-granddaughter, this miracle child who had broken his decade of silence with a simple offer to share her sandwich, who had somehow found her way to the one bench in Boston where he sat every day, who had even found her way to her great-aunt's long-lost locket. "I think you're right," he said softly. "Some love is too strong to be stopped by anything, not fire, not time, not even death itself." 1 year later, Robert celebrated his 106th birthday in a home filled with life. Sarah and Emily had found a house just 2 blocks away, but Robert's apartment had remained their gathering place, their heart center. The birthday celebration was small, but meaningful. Sarah had baked a cake using her grandmother's recipe, found in an old notebook Robert had preserved. Emily played Happy Birthday on a small piano they'd bought together. She'd been taking lessons, showing the same natural talent her great-aunt had possessed. "Make a wish, great-grandpa," Emily called out as Robert faced his candles. Looking at his rediscovered family, Robert smiled. "I already got my wish," he said, "but I'll make one for the future instead." The past year had transformed them all. Sarah had found peace, finally able to lay down the burden of being the sole survivor. She'd started a support group at the hospital for other families affected by tragedy, sharing her story of hope and reunion. Emily had blossomed, carrying the legacy of her namesake with grace. She played piano at the senior center where Robert now volunteered, bringing music to other elderly people who needed it. The residents said she had healing hands, just like her mother the nurse, just like her great-aunt, who had once played in that same center. Robert had changed the most. Gone was the silent man who fed pigeons in the park. He spoke at schools now, telling children about the importance of family, of never giving up hope. His story had inspired others to reconnect with lost relatives, to keep searching, to believe in miracles. The locket had become their family's symbol of hope. Emily wore it every day, and sometimes when the light hit it just right, they could swear it glowed with its own inner warmth. "I have something to show you," Emily said after the cake was finished. She pulled out her school notebook and opened it to a story she'd written. "The bench in the Common," she read. "Once there was a lonely man who sat on a bench every day, holding all his love in silence. And there was a lonely girl who carried her mother's hidden grief, until one day a sandwich and a name brought them together, proving that love never dies. It just waits for the right moment to bring us home." Sarah hugged her daughter tight. "When did you get so wise, my sweet girl?" "I think," Robert said softly, "she was born with the wisdom of all those we lost. Your grandmother's strength, your mother's compassion, my Emily's gift for healing hearts." He looked around his apartment, once a shrine to grief, now a testament to love's endurance. The walls held new photos alongside the old ones. Emily at her piano recital, Sarah receiving an award at the hospital, the three of them together on countless ordinary days, made extraordinary by their shared joy. "You know," Robert said, "for 10 years, I thought I was keeping their memory alive by holding on to my grief. But now I understand. The best way to honor those we've lost is to live fully, to love deeply, to share the joy they would have wanted for us." Emily took out her great-aunt's locket and opened it, adding a new photo alongside the old one, a picture of the three of them on the bench where they'd found each other. "See," she said, "now our whole family is together, the ones here and the ones watching over us." As evening fell, they sat together in the warm light of Robert's apartment, sharing stories old and new, weaving together the threads of past and present, and somewhere they felt certain those they had lost were smiling, knowing that love had found its way home at last.